Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking a look at some very easy to make mistakes that you absolutely must avoid when playing Manor Lords. I have a very in-depth video already on the channel to introduce some of the basic and intermediate concepts, and you can find that linked in the pinned comment below. And that aside, as always, you'll find timestamps down below to jump around this video as you'd like. If you have specific topics you'd like to see covered in future guide videos, let me know, and feel free to subscribe for more Manor Lords content if you enjoy this video. One last thing I'd like to mention, outside of this channel, I am affiliated with the publisher Hooded Horse, and while that doesn't impact what videos I make on the channel, I like to mention it for the sake of transparency. With that said, and with no more time to waste on an introduction, let's begin. Don't leave people homeless. Sounds like an obvious one, I know, but there's something I've noticed is catching people off guard. Upgrading your homeless people's tent to a worker camp sounds like a nice and quick solution to the homelessness problem. This is fine for a new region that you don't really want to fully settle just yet, as it'll stop the negative approval ratings from homelessness getting too high and then remove them over time. So maybe you just want some resources from a different region, needing only a handful of families for the time being to acquire said resources and store them for a different region's pack station to come and pick them up through barter. That's a good time to use the upgrade, but I would actually advise not using it right at the start of a new game for your first homeless people's tents. You can establish homes soon enough for these guys, but if you are struggling to do so, sure, this upgrade can immediately help. But if you do that, keep in mind that therein lies another issue. This upgraded space will count as housing. That means they won't move into any new houses that you build them with the proper backyards, with the expansion and upgrade opportunities, etc., etc. If you want that to happen, you need to demolish the upgraded camp. You need to make those families homeless again, and that'll force them to move into one of the new homes. People don't just move from home to home of their own accord at random in Manor Lords, and it's no different here. Again, an upgraded homeless people's tent counts as housing when it becomes a worker camp. So if you want those people to forcibly move, you need to demolish the camp. Don't ignore seasonal work. One of the key aspects to a game like this is managing the spread of your workers. When your population is small in particular, it becomes important to pay attention to every individual family and how it's assigned. And to be frank, even when your village has grown to a sizable town, you should keep your mind on seasonal work in particular. Farming is the most obvious seasonal job. Make sure nobody is assigned to the farmhouse when crops are simply growing, unless, of course, there's wheat that needs to be processed into grain. But during plowing, sowing, and harvesting seasons, you need to make sure that there are enough families at the farmhouse to cover all your fields, even if it means pulling people from their other non-seasonal jobs to get the farm work done. Keep in mind that wheat, also known as emmer, will be planted for the winter growing season as well as during the regular growing season, as winter wheat is a thing. Also keep in mind that the farmhouse is where the wheat gets turned into grain. This is called threshing, and you can prioritize it over and under the field-related tasks that come from the farmhouse too. This needs to happen before the grain can be turned into flour at the mill, so prioritize accordingly. On which note, don't assign families to the mill unless there's grain to actually mill, and don't assign families to the communal oven if there's no flour to turn into bread. When it comes to animal husbandry, meanwhile, you want to make sure your sheep farm is left unattended during the winter, as sheep can't be sheared during the winter months. Berry bushes are also completely dead in the winter, so your forager hut should be empty in the winter since there are no berries to harvest. Hunting is a little different. It's not seasonal per se, but you want to make sure not to entirely depopulate a herd, because if you do so, well, there is no more herd to repopulate and you've lost that resource permanently. So when the number gets small enough, make sure to unassign your hunters. Staying on top of seasonal work is important. Don't just leave people twiddling their thumbs for a whole quarter of the year. Don't upgrade too quickly. It can be very tempting to upgrade your burgage plots and build advanced backyard extensions as soon as they become available. Some of the options are super fun after all. Who doesn't want a smith or an armorer or a fletcher? But while upgrading the plot itself is okay, building these higher tier extensions will immediately convert the families that are living in that plot into artisan families, and these families cannot be assigned regular jobs. They only work in their backyard extension. Losing regular families too quickly will result in other essentials being left unattended, especially since your population can only grow at a maximum rate of 2 families per month, only when your approval rating is above 75% and when there are empty houses available. When your approval rating is between 50 and 75% instead, you can only grow at a rate of 1 family per month, and again, you need empty housing. So, if all your families are artisans, who's doing the hunting? Who's chopping the trees? Do note that when you build one of these backyard extensions, every family living in that plot becomes an artisan family. The other danger of upgrading too quickly is losing the supply of lower tier resources. Say, for example, you've established 2 cobblers, but don't produce leather quickly enough to maintain a surplus of leather. Unfortunately, leather is one of the 3 options for the first tier of clothing demand from houses. They don't care if they have shoes, they want their leather. Or yarn or linen, but similarly, if you're converting all the yarn into cloaks and all the linen into clothes, you're missing out on those lower tier goods that people specifically want to meet their lower tier needs. This goes beyond consumer goods too. Too many Fletchers will consume planks before they can be used for construction, for example. Keep an eye out for this and avoid upgrading too quickly. Manage your markets. On the topic of meeting needs, managing markets can be an interesting challenge in Manor Lords. It can be tempting to simply put down additional markets whenever you see needs not being met in a certain neighborhood. But the reality is that markets can cover a very large radius as long as they're well managed. Understanding all the moving parts of a market is very important. First of all, marketplaces will have a maximum number of stalls based on the amount of space available. These stalls are built by families using their own resources, but you can still adjust their placement. Since goods need to be brought over from where they're stored to their respective stalls, repositioning the stalls can actually make a significant difference to the flow of resources. Try to position stalls closer to where they'll be restocked from. Now, where does the stock come from? The closest stockpile. This can be a granary, a storehouse, or the building where the things are actually produced, since they can be stored there too. Making sure the goods are available near the market will improve the throughput of resources, and since granaries and storehouses have access to carts, they can move more units in a single trip as well. But there are only so many slots for families at these buildings, and some of them might opt to open stalls for goods you don't feel you need to distribute because of your personal goals, despite what the people are asking for. This applies especially to the storehouse. Fortunately, by adjusting what a storehouse can actually store, you can adjust what the family members are opening markets for. Similarly, sometimes you might intentionally unassign families from the storehouses and granaries to allow families from production buildings to set up stalls instead. A weaver is pretty well guaranteed to sell yarn, whereas a storehouse worker with a clothing stall might also grab leather or shoes or clothes or cloaks, or they might just set up a firewood stall instead, because guess what? A storehouse can store those too. Using the weaver example, keep in mind that if your weaver owns a chicken coop or vegetable garden backyard extension, they might opt to build a food stall instead, completely negating your plan. At this point, you can demolish their market stall and hope they course correct, or you can micromanage backyard extensions to a greater degree. At a certain point, you'll need to start establishing additional marketplaces, but don't jump to that as your first solution. More often than not, your issue is that of stock and supply at the stalls, and it can be a fun challenge to try and get a market providing to a larger town before relying on additional support markets. Don't wait to fight bandits. In the default scenario, you'll find bandit camps spawning across the map from time to time, and you might think you're better off ignoring them until a later stage. 2 years in, you'll be directly attacked, forced to respond with either your militia or some mercenaries or your retinue. But before then, all the bandits seem to do is steal a few goods every so often, which is a consequence that can feel kind of easy to ignore if you've established yourself well enough. But the long-term consequences go well beyond that. These camps are always guarded by a unit of brigands. Eliminating an enemy unit grants you a decent amount of influence, and once you eliminate your first few enemy units, you'll have enough influence to claim your first additional region. Fighting brigands is fairly simple when you're attacking their camps. They'll have a single unit of about 16 or so individuals, and you can quite confidently defeat them with a single full unit of soldiers. Apart from the initial equipment you get delivered to you, you can relatively easily start producing warbows by upgrading a house to tier 2 and then getting the Fletcher's shop established. Having warbows will allow you to establish units of archers, and they can make relatively quick work of the enemy, sometimes breaking them before front lines even meet. Eventually, you'll have enough money to simply recruit mercenaries to do your dirty work, or Once you build your manor, you'll gain access to your retinue. Neither of these options are recruited from your regular population, so rallying them doesn't slow your economy down, so going to fight has less of an impact on your production capabilities as time goes on. Note that claiming unclaimed territory is relatively easy as a result, as long as you stay on top of it. But when you have to claim a region that already belongs to the Baron, not only do you have to pay twice as much influence, but you also have to face off against him in a pretty serious battle. This can cost your settlement lives and, more importantly, time. Again, every time you raise your militia, the men in your village need to pick up their arms, leaving behind their day jobs. This means that your economy grinds to a halt for the entire time that they're marching, fighting, and marching back before you can disband them so they can return to their regular tasks. Avoiding large battles against the Baron, then, has quite a large impact. And if you don't collect influence to push your claims, the Baron will, and he'll go from holding just 2 regions to 3 to 4 and more, meaning you'll have to participate in even more large battles than you otherwise would have needed to. Plus, you don't want to limit your ability to tap into the resources beyond your starting region. Apart from the influence left on the table, you're also leaving money out there. Once you eliminate the brigands and collect your influence, make sure you loot the bandit camp too. There's silver to be acquired, and it can either be sent to the nearest region to bolster its regional wealth, or it can be sent to your treasury. Both of these are essential, the former for building backyard upgrades and for importing resources, and the latter for upgrading your retinue in size and equipment, and for settling the various regions that you're claiming, and for acquiring mercenaries too. Don't wait too long to fight bandits. You're basically handing territory to the Baron on a silver platter. Don't overinvest in trade. First, let me be clear. Trade is extremely profitable in Manor Lords. Exporting certain goods will generate a lot of money as long as you don't flood the market, and investing in the right development points can open up the opportunity to import raw goods cheaply and export finished goods for a great profit. And trade is just generally a good way to fill gaps in your ability to provide your people with the things they want and need. It's also a great way to get military equipment to further equip your militia. But in order to do that, you need to invest in opening up a trade route. The same holds true for certain more advanced goods, but you'll notice that you can open these dedicated trade routes for goods that you can trade without them too. The reason for doing this is simply because it guarantees regular visits from foreign merchants to buy or sell the specific good depending on if you're importing or exporting it. The cost of opening these trade routes increases with each added route, so you want to pick and choose them in the right order. Beyond that, if you intend to rely heavily on trade, this development point here will cap the cost of additional trade routes. This can result in huge savings, as again the cost to establish these routes can get into the hundreds very quickly otherwise. But even when cheap, don't just click away here. If you tell a trade post to import or export something, not only will your own assigned families perform the trade themselves, but foreign merchants will also come through to buy things and pick them up at your trade post, or sell things and drop them off at your trade post too. As long as your trade post is connected to a road that is connected to the main roads on the map, i.e. the King's Road, these merchants can come through to do this and perform these trades. Hold down Tab to see them wandering around, but do note that both dedicated and random traveling merchants will be marked the same way. So to summarize, while paying for the dedicated route will guarantee regular visits, you can still get these foreign merchants coming through sporadically without the dedicated trade routes being purchased. While you shouldn't devalue trade, lucrative as it is, you also don't want to overinvest in trade when you don't need to. Don't spend the development points you don't actually need to, don't buy the trade routes you don't actually need to. These points and that money can be used elsewhere to better effect. I hope this video helps you avoid some of the major mistakes that you might be making without even realizing. Manor Lords is a complex game with a lot of moving parts, and this should put you on the right track. I have another in-depth guide video that you'll find linked on screen right now, and I highly recommend watching it. But otherwise, as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons for supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.